The moment I said I do, I didn't just marry David, I unknowingly signed a contract with the devil, and his name was Sterling. Before all the tension, the whispers, and the eventual fracturing, there was just bliss. Or what I thought was bliss. Marrying David Sterling felt like stepping into a movie. He was charming, handsome, and part of one of those old money families in Connecticut, the kind with sprawling estates, inherited art, and a last name that carried weight everywhere from Greenwich to Nantucket. My own background was pretty humble. A small town in upstate New York, a tight-knit family, and definitely no trust funds. But David never made me feel like an outsider. He genuinely seemed to love me, and his family at first seemed genuinely welcoming. We had a reception at the Sterling's estate, a grand old place with more rooms than I could count and gardens that looked like they belonged in a magazine. Everyone was so gracious, so polite. His mother, Eleanor, gave me a hug that felt a little stiff but sincere. His father, Arthur, offered a firm handshake and a warm smile. It felt like I'd found my place, my new family, in a world I never thought I'd touch. But then there was Leo, my brother. He was there, of course, standing a bit awkwardly by the bar, probably wondering what kind of imported beer they even served at a place like this. Leo's a mechanic, always covered in a bit of grease, and he prefers a good dive bar to a country club any day. He looked great in his rented tux, but I could see the discomfort in his eyes, a kind of bewildered amusement mixed with a hint of self-consciousness. He was my rock, my oldest friend. But in that moment, surrounded by the Sterlings and their impeccably dressed friends, he looked like a fish out of water. I introduced him to some of David's cousins, and while they were polite, their smiles never quite reached their eyes. It was a subtle thing, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a faint crack in the perfect polished facade of the Sterling world. After the wedding, as I settled into life as a Sterling, the cracks started to show, and they usually appeared whenever David's sister Victoria was around. Victoria was the epitome of Sterling elegance, always impeccably dressed, with a perfectly coiffed blonde bob and a laugh that tinkled like crystal. She chaired countless charity committees and knew everyone worth knowing in the tri-state area. She seemed perfectly nice on the surface, but I quickly learned there was a sharp edge hidden beneath all that polish, especially when it came to Leo. I remember one family brunch at her magnificent townhouse in the Upper East Side, not long after we got back from our honeymoon. Leo had driven down from Albany, and he showed up in his usual comfortable jeans and a really nice flannel shirt, clean but definitely not the kind of thing you'd see at a Sterling gathering. Victoria greeted him with a bright smile, but then her eyes did that thing where they sort of flicked down, taking in his outfit. "Leo, darling," she cooed, "so good to see you. That's a very practical shirt. David, dear, remind me to tell you about that wonderful bespoke tailor I found for Arthur. You know, for when you need something more, shall we say, polished?" It wasn't an insult, not directly, but it hung in the air, a subtle dismissal of Leo's entire vibe. Another time, at a garden party, Victoria cornered me, ostensibly to chat about my new life. "It's just so wonderful, Clara," she said, sipping champagne. "But tell me, what exactly does your brother do again? Something with cars, right? It sounds so hands-on. Does he ever worry about getting, grease under his nails for important events? We do have quite a few galas coming up this season." She'd smile as she said these things, making it sound like she was just innocently curious, but every word felt like a tiny needle prick. I'd try to laugh it off, maybe say something about how Leo loved his work and was incredibly talented, trying to smooth over her thinly veiled digs. I kept telling myself it was just Victoria being Victoria, a bit of a socialite snob, but harmless. I couldn't have been more wrong. Victoria's subtle jabs started to morph into something more pointed, something that made me uneasy even then, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. It was like she wasn't just observing Leo anymore, she was researching him. She'd call me, seemingly out of the blue, always starting with some innocuous Sterling family gossip or a question about a new charity event, then smoothly pivot to Leo. "Clara, darling, about your brother," she'd say, her voice dripping with feigned concern. "David mentioned he had a bit of a wild streak as a teenager. Nothing serious, I hope. Just curious, for family context." I, being incredibly naive and wanting desperately to fit in, would try to paint Leo in the best light. "Oh, Leo? Wild? Not really. He was just a typical high schooler, Got into a bit of mischief here and there. Nothing that landed him in real trouble. There was that one time he and his friends, accidentally let the air out of the tires of the principal's car for a prank, but they aired them right back up. He was just being a kid." I'd laugh, trying to make it sound endearing. A charming anecdote from a simpler time. She'd just hum thoughtfully, her tone always so understanding. "Ah, yes, teenage antics, so relatable. And what about that little stint with, what was it, a summer job at a different garage before he settled into his current place? Any particular reason for the change?" I'd tell her about Leo trying out a few places before finding the right fit, about how he was ambitious and always wanted to learn. I'd recount stories of him fixing up old cars in our driveway, making a bit of extra cash. Each detail, each harmless memory, I handed over to her, completely unaware that I was giving her ammunition. I just thought she was trying to get to know my family, to build a bridge. Looking back, it makes my stomach clench, knowing I basically handed her the shovel she used to dig Leo's grave, socially speaking. I honestly believe she wanted to understand him, to see him as part of our family. My trust was a foolish, blinding thing. The change wasn't sudden, it was insidious, like a slow-acting poison seeping into the Sterling family's perfectly manicured garden. First, it was just a strange look from a distant aunt at a charity gala, then a slightly too long pause when Leo's name came up at Sunday dinner. Then, the whispers started. I remember standing by the buffet table at the annual Sterling summer party, held on the vast manicured lawns of David's parents' estate. I was reaching for a mini quiche when I heard it. David's cousin, Beatrice, a woman usually all smiles and graciousness, speaking in hushed tones to her husband. Can you believe what Victoria told me about Clara's brother? Something about him being involved in, some rather unseemly activities in his youth. Quite the troublemaker, apparently. Pranks, yes, but also property damage and a very unsettling incident with a previous employer. Victoria said he practically ruined their reputation. My hand froze mid-air. Property damage? Unsettling incident with an employer? I knew exactly what Victoria had twisted. The principal's car tires, the job change, harmless teenage experimentation, and career exploration now warped into something sinister. My stomach dropped like a stone. I backed away, my heart pounding, trying to disappear into the crowd. Later, I overheard Victoria herself, chatting with Eleanor, David's mother, by the rose bushes. Victoria's voice was low, conspiratorial. It's just so unfortunate, Eleanor. Clara is lovely, truly, but her brother? Well, one does worry about appearances, don't they? Especially with our family standing. That incident at the garage he worked at years ago, where things supposedly went missing. And his general lack of ambition. It really does put a stain on things, doesn't it? Eleanor merely hummed, a non-committal sound, but I could see the slight furrow in her brow. It hit me then, with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just Victoria being a snob. This was a deliberate, calculated campaign to discredit Leo, to paint him as something he wasn't, to make him an unacceptable presence in the Sterling world. And I, in my desperate desire to be accepted, had unknowingly given her the very weapons she was using against my own brother. The realization made me feel sick, a mix of rage and profound regret churning inside me. The whispers Victoria had sown quickly bore bitter fruit. It wasn't long before the family dynamic shifted dramatically. Suddenly, invitations to certain Sterling gatherings seemed to stop arriving for Leo, and sometimes, by extension, for me. When we did attend, there was a noticeable chill in the air. Conversations would dry up when Leo approached, or people would suddenly remember an urgent need to freshen their drinks. David's cousin, Beatrice, who had once been so friendly, now offered only tight-lipped smiles and avoided eye contact. It was subtle, but it was suffocating. Leo, bless his heart, tried to brush it off, but I could see the hurt in his eyes, the way he'd retreat into himself during these events. The breaking point for me came during a quiet Tuesday afternoon tea at Eleanor's, David's mother. Victoria was there, of course. I'd had enough of the cold shoulders and the thinly veiled snubs. Victoria, I began, my voice steadier than I felt, we need to talk about Leo. What you've been saying to people, it's not true, and it's completely unfair. Her teacup clattered softly as she set it down. Her smile, usually plastered on, completely vanished. Unfair, Clara? Darling, I'm only speaking the truth. One has a certain responsibility to the family name, you know. We can't have someone with that kind of background, those incidents from his past, reflecting poorly on the Sterlings. Her voice was no longer sweet. It was icy, edged with pure disdain. He's a stain, Clara. A common, unrefined stain on our family's image. I'm simply doing what needs to be done to protect David and the rest of us from his influence. My jaw dropped. The polite facade had shattered completely, revealing the venom underneath. It was one thing to imply things, another to openly call my brother a stain. He's my brother, Victoria, I retorted, my voice rising. He's a good person, and those incidents you're so gleefully spreading, they're fabrications and exaggerations. David, bless his heart, tried to step in, murmuring, Now, ladies, let's not get heated. But he didn't stand up for Leo, not really. He just wanted the unpleasantness to stop. He was caught between his sister and his wife, and in that moment, he seemed to prioritize the Sterling's fragile peace over defending the truth. That afternoon, the chasm between Victoria and me, and indeed, within the Sterling family, became undeniably real. It wasn't just awkwardness anymore, it was an open wound. The atmosphere in the Sterling household became thick with unspoken tension. After that confrontation, Victoria barely acknowledged my presence, and the rest of the family seemed to follow suit, their politeness now a thin veil over their judgment. David was trying to be supportive, but his attempts to mediate were weak, always leaning towards keeping the peace with his sister rather than truly validating my feelings or defending Leo. She's just very protective of the family, Clara, he'd say. You know how she is about appearances. It felt less like an explanation and more like an excuse, and it left me feeling utterly alone in this opulent, suffocating world. Leo, meanwhile, was getting more and more distant. He'd stopped coming to family dinners entirely, finding excuses every time I invited him. When we did talk on the phone, his voice was laced with a bitterness I hadn't heard before. Clara, he'd said one night, his voice tight, they don't want me there, plain and simple. And honestly, after what your sister-in-law's been doing, twisting everything, why would I want to be? You need to see them for what they are. This isn't just about me, it's about what kind of people you're tied to now. His words hit hard because I was already seeing it. The glamorous Sterling life, which had once seemed so alluring, now felt like a gilded cage. Every silk dress, every glittering jewel, every perfectly curated social event felt like a reminder of the price I was paying, not just for myself, but for Leo. He was my anchor, my connection to who I was before the Sterlings. He'd been there for every scraped knee, every bad breakup, every small triumph. And now I was being forced into an impossible corner. My brother, or my new family's fragile, artificial peace. The pressure was immense, a constant gnawing weight in my chest. How could I choose? And more importantly, could I live with myself no matter what decision I made? The pressure had been building for weeks, a suffocating weight that crushed the joy out of my new life. Leo's pain, Victoria's venom, David's passivity, it all culminated in a single, desperate decision. I couldn't stand by and watch my brother be systematically ostracized, not when I knew the truth. The gilded cage had become a prison, and I had to choose. And I chose Leo. It started subtly, with me actively defending Leo in front of family members who, moments before, had been nodding along to Victoria's veiled insults. Then I began to openly question Victoria's recollections about Leo's past, politely but firmly correcting her exaggerations at family gatherings. The polite smiles of the Sterlings began to crack, replaced by thinly veiled shock and disapproval. David would clear his throat, tug at my arm, whisper, "Clara, please, not here." But I couldn't stop. The resentment had boiled over. The real shift came at the annual Sterling Family Foundation dinner, a huge black tie affair held at the Plaza Hotel in New York City. Victoria, in her element, was holding court, regaling a group of influential donors with another embellished tale about Leo's colorful youth, turning a simple teenage mistake into a narrative of reckless abandon. I walked right up to her, my voice clear enough for everyone nearby to hear, but calm. "Victoria," I said, "that's simply not true. Leo was a typical teenager, full of spirit, and certainly never involved in anything criminal. You seem to enjoy distorting his past, and I have to ask why." A stunned silence fell over the group. Victoria's face went from practiced charm to an icy mask of fury. David rushed over, looking mortified, his face pale. "Clara, what are you doing?" he hissed, pulling me aside. But it was too late. The damage, or rather, the truth, was out. The pretense of peace within the Sterling family shattered like fine china hitting a marble floor. Victoria stared at me, her eyes blazing with an unholy mix of outrage and pure hatred, a silent promise of retaliation. That night, as David and I drove back to our quiet, now tense home in Connecticut, the silence in the car was deafening. He knew, I knew, we all knew. I had made my choice. And in doing so, I had not just sided with my brother. I had declared war on Victoria and the subtle, insidious power she wielded within the Sterling Empire. The future was no longer about fitting in, it was about survival, and the looming conflict felt like a storm gathering on the horizon. The drive back to our Connecticut home after the Plaza dinner was less about tension and more about a chilling, absolute silence. David didn't yell. He didn't even argue. He just stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, a clear signal that I had crossed a line he couldn't, or wouldn't, reconcile. The storm I'd sensed on the horizon, it didn't break with thunder and lightning. It arrived as a deep, pervasive freeze. Almost immediately, the social thermometer in our world plummeted. The Sterling family network, once a warm embrace, became a frigid expanse. Invitations to exclusive charity galas, art auctions in New York City, even casual family brunches at the country club in Greenwich, simply stopped arriving for me. When I did run into someone from David's circle, at the grocery store or picking up dry cleaning in town, their usual effusive greetings were replaced by hurried nods, averted gazes, and mumbled excuses to rush off. It was like I had contracted some social contagion, and no one wanted to be exposed. Victoria, of course, remained outwardly charming to everyone else, her smile wider, her eyes gleaming with a quiet triumph I knew was directed solely at me. David, for his part, tried to act normal, but the strain was obvious. He'd suggest we stay in more often, or visit his old college friends outside of the Sterling orbit, anything to avoid the palpable discomfort of family gatherings. He made weak attempts to smooth things over with Victoria, phone calls I could hear through the closed study door, always ending with a sigh of defeat. "She's just so firm in her beliefs, Clara," he'd say, as if her character assassination of my brother was just a quaint eccentricity. He was caught, I knew, between his family's expectations and the wife who had just defied them. And as I felt the isolation deepen, a new kind of reliance formed. Leo. He was the only one who didn't look at me differently, the only one who understood what I was up against. My rock and a target. The social freeze was just the first layer. Soon, Victoria's influence began to manifest in ways that hit closer to home, specifically our finances. David and I weren't struggling by any means, but the Sterlings had a vast network of connections, especially in the philanthropic and investment worlds, that David often leveraged for his own boutique real estate ventures. Those doors started to quietly close. The first hint was when a major investor, a longtime associate of Arthur Sterling, suddenly pulled out of a lucrative development deal David had been working on for months. The reason given was vague, something about a reevaluation of portfolio focus, but I saw David's face when he got the call. He looked like he'd been punched. Then came the emails, subtle at first, from board members of a prominent art museum we were heavily involved with, hinting that perhaps it was time for David and I to step back from our fundraising roles due to internal restructuring. It was all very polite, very subtle, but the message was clear. Victoria was tightening the screws. "It's nothing, Clara," David would insist, running a hand through his hair, his usual composure beginning to fray. "Just market fluctuations. And the museum thing? Well, these things happen." But the dark circles under his eyes told a different story. He started working longer hours, making more nervous calls, trying to drum up new business from outside the Sterling's usual orbit, often without success. The opulent lifestyle we'd slid into suddenly felt less like a given and more like a privilege that could be revoked at any moment. I could feel the pressure mounting on him, and it wasn't lost on me that every new setback seemed to follow closely on the heels of another one of my quiet acts of defiance against Victoria. She wasn't just isolating me socially, she was making our very lives financially uncomfortable. It was a cold, calculated strategy designed to make David resent my defiance, to make him see my loyalty to Leo as a liability to his own standing and to our shared future. The golden cage wasn't just beautiful anymore, it was starting to feel very, very expensive. Victoria's campaign wasn't just about cutting us off financially or socially. She was far more ruthless than I'd ever imagined. She went after Leo directly, and that's when I knew this wasn't just about protecting the Sterling name anymore. It was about outright destruction. Leo called me late one Tuesday night, his voice devoid of its usual easygoing humor, replaced by a raw edge of panic I'd never heard. "Clara, you're not gonna believe this," he started. "I just got a call from the shop owner. My job? I'm out. Fired." My heart seized. "What? Why? Leo, you're their best mechanic." He said it was due to recent discoveries impacting trust and reputation. Wouldn't say more, just that he'd heard things, and given his shop's standing in the community, he couldn't afford to keep me on. Something about past legal troubles and unreliable character. I knew immediately who was behind it. Victoria. She hadn't just exaggerated, she'd clearly dug deeper, maybe found some long-forgotten, dismissed juvenile record, or perhaps even fabricated a more damaging narrative to share with influential people in Leo's local area. His boss, a decent man, probably got an anonymous tip or a subtle nudge from someone with enough power to make him reconsider employing a problematic mechanic. It was a direct hit, aimed straight at my brother's livelihood, at his very sense of stability and worth. The injustice of it burned through me. Leo, who had always worked so hard, always been so proud of his hands-on skills, was now a casualty of a war he hadn't even signed up for. He was utterly devastated, lost, and my guilt was a suffocating blanket. I was the one who had brought the Sterling darkness into his life, the one who, in my blind trust, had given Victoria the details she'd twisted into weapons. This wasn't just about me choosing a side anymore. Victoria was actively dismantling my brother's life, and I was reeling from the collateral damage. Leo's job loss was a direct hit, and it sent tremors through our already fractured life. David, who had been trying to maintain a precarious neutrality, finally buckled under the combined weight of his family's disapproval and the mounting financial strain. The atmosphere in our home became unbearable, silent dinners, tense mornings, and an unspoken accusation hanging heavy in the air. One evening, after another pointed phone call with his mother, David came into the living room where I was sitting, staring blankly at the unlit fireplace. His face was pale, his shoulders slumped. He sat opposite me, not meeting my eyes. "Clara," he started, his voice flat, "this can't go on. My father, Victoria? They're making things impossible. For me, for us. My reputation is taking a hit, and frankly, our bank accounts are starting to feel it too." He finally looked at me, and his eyes, usually so warm, were clouded with a mix of desperation and cold resolve. "You have to fix this. You need to apologize to Victoria, publicly, and you need to tell everyone that you were mistaken, that your brother's past was, perhaps, more complicated than you let on." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "And you need to distance yourself from Leo, at least for a while, until this all blows over." The words hit me like a physical blow, each one a hammer strike against my already aching heart. He was asking me to betray my brother, to sacrifice my integrity, to lie and bow down to Victoria's malicious campaign. "David," I whispered, my voice barely audible, "you can't be serious. You want me to lie? To abandon Leo, after everything Victoria has done to him? To us?" His voice grew firmer, tinged with a desperation that was almost chilling. "Clara, this isn't a request. This is what it's come to. It's either Leo or us, our marriage, our life here. You have to choose." The golden cage had finally revealed its true nature, a trap. And the choice wasn't just between my brother and my marriage anymore. It was between who I was and who they wanted me to be. The silence that followed his ultimatum was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The silence in the room stretched, thick and suffocating, until David's ultimatum echoed in my mind. It's either Leo or us, our marriage, our life here. My throat was tight, my chest aching. How could this be happening? How could the man I loved ask me to betray the very essence of who I was? But then I thought of Leo, not just his pain, but his desperation when he told me he'd been fired. I pictured him, my strong, independent brother, stripped of his livelihood, his pride wounded, all because of a woman's malice and my inability to navigate this treacherous new world. I thought of David too, the desperation in his eyes, the subtle tremor in his voice. He wasn't malicious like Victoria, he was just weak, drowning under the weight of his family's expectations and the sudden economic chill. If I didn't comply, I could lose everything, my marriage, my home, the future I'd envisioned. And what would be the point of standing by Leo if it meant destroying my own life and dragging him down further? The words felt like ash in my mouth as I finally spoke. "I'll do it, David." My voice was barely a whisper. "I'll apologize. I'll say whatever she wants me to say." A wave of profound relief washed over David's face, immediately followed by a flicker of something unreadable. Perhaps guilt, perhaps shame. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away, unable to bear his touch. The victory was his and Victoria's, but it felt like my own defeat. The apology came quickly. It was a humiliating spectacle, orchestrated by Victoria, of course. At a small, carefully curated family gathering, I stood, swallowed my pride, and delivered the lines she'd practically dictated. I mumbled something about misunderstandings and regret over any distress caused by past remarks, carefully avoiding any mention of Leo specifically, but the message was clear. Victoria watched me, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips, her eyes cold and utterly victorious. The other Sterlings offered polite, almost pitying nods. David looked relieved, a tension easing from his shoulders I hadn't realized he carried so heavily. But the relief didn't reach me. Instead, a profound isolation settled in. The act of public submission felt like a piece of my soul had been chipped away. I had chosen, yes, but the choice had left me broken. The peace that returned to the Sterling household was hollow, built on a foundation of lies and my own quiet despair. The silence was back, but this time it was my own. The peace that settled over the Sterling family after my public retraction was a cold, brittle thing. Victoria was triumphant, her smiles sharper, her social power seemingly unchallenged. David, visibly relieved that the pressure from his family had eased, tried to return to normal, but normal was gone. Every touch felt superficial. Every shared glance held a silent acknowledgement of the unforgivable compromise I'd made. The man who had asked me to choose had, in essence, chosen for me, and a part of our connection had simply withered and died. We lived in the same grand house, shared the same bed, attended the same elite functions, but the intimacy, the easy laughter, the genuine warmth, it was all gone, replaced by a hollow shell of a marriage. And Leo. That was the deepest cut. He rarely answered my calls anymore, and when he did, his voice was flat, distant. The pride he'd once had, the resilience that always bounced him back, seemed to have been extinguished by Victoria's relentless attacks and my ultimate public capitulation. He got another job eventually, I heard, further upstate, far from the Sterling orbit, but the spark was gone. My rock, my brother, the one constant in my life, had been irrevocably damaged, and our bond, once unbreakable, was now a fragile, almost non-existent thread. I knew deep down that in saving my marriage, I had lost him. I remained in the golden cage, now fully integrated into the Sterling world, but utterly and completely alone. The social slights had ceased. I was accepted again, praised for my understanding and family loyalty. Yet every polite smile I received felt like a judgment. Every whispered compliment a reminder of the price I had paid. I was a Sterling by name, living in their world of old money and polished facades, but I was a prisoner, haunted by the ghost of the sister I once was, and the brother I had, in a way, sacrificed. The fight was over, and Victoria had won. I had survived, yes, but I had lost everything that truly mattered, leaving me with a future that felt cold, empty, and endlessly fragmented.